Hello and welcome to FranklinCovey's weekly On Leadership series. My name is Scott Miller, and I have the honor each week of serving as your host, where my main role here is to really help to curate people we think you'll find interesting, that will add value to your life, personally and professionally. Read their books, research their point of view, and then bring them on set, live in some cases or live virtual in most cases. And today our guest is, about a 15-year friend of mine, Chester Elton. He's the co-author of numerous best-selling books, including this most recent book, The Best Teams Win, The Science of High Performance. Chester Elton, welcome to FranklinCovey's On Leadership.
Thanks so much, Scott. Always a delight to be with you.
Chester, I think having you and I in the same set physically would be probably wrong because our energy is so high. So we only asked you to come via video because the set can't probably contain both your and my energy.
I think you're right. I think we want to avoid that spontaneous combustion thing that could very well happen.
Chester, you and I have been friends for, like I said, almost 15 years. Ironically, you and I both presented at a conference in Beijing, China, back in the early 2000s. In fact, I've learned a lesson. You always want to go before Chester because the audience will forget you if you go after Chester. That's some advice to anybody who's on stage with you. Always precede Chester.
Well, you're very kind. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun in China, no doubt about it.
It was, and I've followed your career for the last 15 years. You and your business partner, Adrian, have written many best-selling books. You are a world-renowned authority on employee engagement and culture, high-performance teams, rewards, the difference between awards and rewards and retention. I wonder if you take a couple of moments to kind of level set for our audience, your journey, kind of where you started, how your expertise has developed and evolved over the years, and maybe remind some of our audience listeners and viewers some of the books that you and your partner Adrian have authored over the years.
Sure. Get that question a lot because, I grew up in sales. So I, sold media time. My family, we grew up in radio stations up in Canada and so on. And I took a job with O.C. Tanner, a reward and recognition company. Was there for 19 years and loved that association, loved that industry. Well, I had this idea and I called our then CEO, Kent Murdoch at the time. And I said, hey, Kent, if we became the thought leaders in our industry, then you would make my life as a salesperson a lot easier. People would call us for advice instead of me having to cold call everybody. And thought leaders they write books. And no one has written the definitive book on employer recognition. What do you think? And he goes, hey, I love that idea. Write the book. And I said, well, Kent, when I said we should write the book, I meant you should write the book and then I should benefit from that book. You give me these crushing quotas and who's got time to write a book? And he said something that changed everything. He said, you know what, Chester, you're a smart guy. Figure it out. So for about a year, I played with ideas and titles and chapter heads. And Kent called me back and said, look, I've hired a new VP of communications. His name is Adrian Gostick. He's a writer. You've got the context. Get together, write the book. And so we did. We introduced ourselves to each other at a sales conference down in Florida. And he grew up in Canada. I grew up in Canada. So we had that hockey thing, in common. And a year later, we dropped a book on Kent Murdoch's desk called Managing with Carrots. It was all about recognition and case studies. And he was really funny. He said, I love being CEO. You just say stuff and it happens. And that's where it started. We didn't know we didn't know. It was a little publisher out of Layton, Utah called Gibbs Smith that wanted to start a business division that gave us our first break. And we sold 35,000 copies. Yeah. We thought if you didn't sell, 10 million, like Good to Great or 7 Habits, you were nobody. Fact is, most Harvard Business School books, they sell 6,000 to 8,000 copies. So we had a hit. And so after that, we wrote the 24 Carat Manager and then A Carrot a Day. And you sort of get the theme of carrots and orange, which is our favorite color. And then we wrote the Carrot Principle, which really, we wrote that with Simon & Schuster, which became kind of our best-selling, foundational book on when you reward and recognize people, how good things happen. How do you do that? And what's the research and the science behind it? And then once we'd kind of explored that, we took a deep dive on culture. We said, if you don't get the culture right, the recognition doesn't matter. And that's when we wrote, All In, how the best managers create that culture of belief that drive big results. And we got into more the umbrella of culture, of which recognition is a part, no doubt. And then we got into the principles of leadership and employee engagement and teams. how that overall culture then expresses itself in every division and every team. And that result of the book you're holding, The Best Team Wins. So that's my journey. It's been a ton of fun. We published our first book in 2000. We just finished our 11th book. We've sold, over 1.5 million copies, 30 languages, Chinese, which is why we were in Beijing. And it couldn't have been more fun, more gratifying. So thanks for asking.
Chester, it's a great story, and I appreciate you kind of walking us through it because I think there's some lessons to be learned in it. And that is, I know you, as do millions around the world, as one of the most recognized experts on recognition, right, and employee rewards. And now you have broadened your expertise with Adrian. You've written a book called The Best Team Wins. The book is phenomenal. It's so great. It's today's topic. What advice would you give the listener who's thinking their expertise is in one area and 15 years later it broadens to another? Would you have ever thought back in the Layton, Utah days of the Carrot books around recognition that you'd have broadened your focus? What have you learned that you could have short-circuited, or would you have short-circuited it because now your expertise is so much broader than that original niche? What are some of the lessons to be learned from your own brand expansion?
Really insightful question, Scott. And I think the advice I would give everyone, and what Adrian and I have tried to continue to do in our 20-year relationship, is to continue to be curious and humble. Yeah. Curious in that you don't know what you don't know. And so ask a lot of questions. Surround yourself with really smart people. My father was my best friend and my mentor, and he had a great sense of humor. He'd say, Chester, you never want to be the smartest guy in the room. He said, the good news for you is you can walk into pretty much any room. So, he also said I had a great face for radio. My point is be curious, ask lots of questions, surround yourself with interesting people, and have that humility to realize that you're never going to arrive, right? You're never going to know everything. You're never going to be the ultimate expert in anything. There are always things that you can learn and that people can teach you. I've had the good fortune to, as I travel to various conferences, is to associate with other speakers like you, and other experts, and be curious, introduce yourself, ask them about what they do. How does it tie in? It really is a very small world. And now with platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, it's very easy to connect with people literally all over the world. So my advice is stay curious and stay humble.
It's helpful because, as you know, I've just written my first book, Management Mess to Leadership Success. I'm delighted with the response. It sold almost 20,000 copies in the first 6 weeks. You were gracious enough to review it and endorse it on your massive LinkedIn channel. And as I'm now getting offers to write more books and I'm writing more, I'm kind of where you were about 15 years ago thinking, where am I going to end up in terms of my brand expertise? And if I could be more deliberate about it, I think it'd be more helpful to my readers and my own audience. But your advice of curiosity and humility, I think, is insightful and a good reminder for me. Thank you.
Well, sure. What's really interesting is now that you and by the way, 20,000 copies in 6 weeks, that's a hit.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations. That's amazing. And people always say, well, how do you write how do you get a New York Times bestselling book? And it starts with writing a great book.
It's true.
It really does. So the advice that I would give you is continue to hone your writing skills. We bring in a lot of editors, we bring in a lot of thinkers to take a look at our manuscripts and take a look at the theme and who's the audience, what's the message, why should I listen to you? And really, really get that expertise to make sure that more than anything, the final product of your book, and this goes to anything, right? Whether it's going to be a blog or a podcast, that you're really, really proud of that final product, that it's the best you can make it. Because once you've got a great product, then everything else falls into place.
Well said, Chester. Let's talk now about the best team wins. I want to organize this interview into two parts. First, you have 5 disciplines around leading teams. I want to talk about that. And then at the end of your book, which is kind of a style that you and Adrian follow in a lot of your books, you share a toolkit with 101 ways to inspire your team. I want to have a bit of a speed round and talk about 12 or 15 of those 101 ways. So take a swig of coffee or some root beer or something and get yourself ready. Talk a bit about why your latest passion research focused on the power of teamwork.
Well, what's interesting is as we took a deep dive on culture, culture It starts at the top with leaders, no question, and then it filters down. Well, in any organization of any size, if you've got an accounts receivable group or an R&D group or a sales group, they develop kind of their own cultures, their own interpretation of that culture. And we took a deep dive on teams because never before has it been more diverse in the workplace, in the sense that it's multi-generational. It's much more global. You have remote employees. So, the 5 disciplines of great teams by Lancioni, which is a great book that you should read.
Yep.
And I'm sure you have.
It's up here.
Those
Yep.
basics of trust and mission and vision, those are all still there. What we wanted to look at were these 5 dimensions that seem to jump up above and beyond what we traditionally think of as teams. And we found it to be very helpful for team leaders to be really cognizant of and have some tools to deal with these new 5 dimensions.
So in the first part of your book, you talk about what you call the 5 disciplines of team leaders. Number 1, understand generations. 2, manage to the one. 3, speed productivity. 4, challenge everything. And 5, now don't forget your customers. Let's talk a bit about number 1, this first discipline around understanding generations. You write in the book about the average kind of employment tenure, right? I mean, you and I are unusual for the new generation. We're about the same age. I've been at FranklinCovey for 23 years. My father before me was at Lockheed Martin for, close to 30 years. You were at O.C. Tanner for, how long did you say?
19 years.
19 years. And this is now the exception. Walk us through what the research says are the longevities of these generations and why it's so different now with this newer generation.
Well, yeah. And, the millennial generation is now the largest generation in the workforce. And you look at the way that they grew up. And by the way, this is general information, right? Don't pigeonhole people. There are a lot of exceptions to the rule. This is sort of the basic trend. And, they saw their parents stay at companies for 20, 25, 30 years. And then, they got downsized or they got merged or their jobs got outsourced and somebody, did some funny business with their retirement funds. And all that loyalty to the company was not repaid. And you look at now with the speed of business, with the, mergers and acquisitions and transition, that compact between company and employee has really been broken. So this is a generation that says, look, I'm not going to get caught in that trap. Unemployment numbers are at all-time lows. They're smart, they're tech savvy, they've got their followership, they've got options. And so what's important to them is very different than what was important to our parents and even our generation, which was that loyalty factor. You go to a place and you build a career. Now it's all about gaining experience and expertise, learning and growing, making a difference, having impact. And once I feel like I'm not growing and learning anymore, I've got options. So managing a team that's very fluid, where you're going to have people stay for 2, maybe 3 years before they have that itch to move. How do you engage them? How do you get the most out of them while they're there? And Scott, really importantly, is don't be offended when they leave.
Yeah.
Our past generation was, if you worked at a company for 20 years and you decided to leave, it was like a betrayal.
Right.
That you'd gone to competition or, you were insulting.
How could you? How could you do that?
Yeah. Exactly. And by the way, and after you left, you got blamed for everything that went wrong for the next
6
months. So that is no longer true. So the way you onboard people, which was our segment on speed to productivity, how do you get them onboarded much faster than traditionally? And how do you say goodbye? Because the way you say goodbye says a lot about your culture. And here's the other thing you've got to remember. With this very fluid, very mobile workforce, you may want to welcome them back. You want to say goodbye graciously and say, by the way, go out, learn some more, get some more expertise. You're always welcome back. It's not uncommon.
I think, Chester, you've hit something that is so important for leaders, which you just said is, you didn't use the word revolving door, but go out, get some more experience. We hope you come back. And by the way, refer some of your great friends into our organization while you're gone, right? Because we want to tap into your network as well.
Exactly. You think about building your company brand. Well, who's ever there or who's ever not there or who's ever left, you want them to be ambassadors for your brand.
Right.
And have them say, hey, I had a chance to, an offer from FranklinCovey. What would you say? Say, you know what? I was there for 23 years. Amazing.
Yeah.
Great people, absolutely take a look, as opposed to, I really enjoyed my time there. When it came time to leave, they got really funny with me.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I don't know. You never want that, ickiness at the end.
Chester, debunk this for me. It seems to me my experience has been for the last, 50 plus years, it was a badge of honor to stay with the company for, your entire career. Or maybe if you were hazardous, you had 2 jobs in, 30 or 40 years. And when you went to go look at someone's resume, if they had 4 or 5 jobs, they were sort of toxic. Why were you bouncing around? It seems like now it's the exact opposite. If you've stayed one place for 25 years, you're kind of toxic. It's because, were you not entrepreneurial and are you too set in your ways? And now it's quite the norm to have someone in their 30s that's had 5 or 6 or 7 jobs. That's kind of not just the norm, it's expected.
Well, and even further, it says you've been there for 25 years, like nobody else wanted you.
That's right. Right.
Like that.
You've crushed me. You've crushed me.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Now, I don't think that's a problem if, and here's the if you can show that you've done multiple different things.
Right.
Like your career at FranklinCovey,
Right.
you've done 15 different things.
Right. I've had 9 legitimate careers in 23 years here. It's true.
So you literally had 9 different jobs. It's just the fact that you've been at the same company.
Yeah.
I'll tell you who does this really well is American Express. They actually encourage their employees every 2 to 3 years to look for something new, to look to move. Now, their organization is big enough that they have international opportunities. They've got different divisions, new product development, and so on, because they understand that if their people aren't moving and growing, they're gonna lose them. To your point, though, I had a friend call me from the UK, and he just made a move. He'd been in a company for a long time, made a move, had been there just over a year. It wasn't quite what he had hoped, and he got a better offer. And he said, I'm worried that on my resume, it'll look like I'm job hopping too quickly. And my advice to him was what you just said. I said, do you know what, buddy? Nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
Like nobody cares.
Right.
They want you. They're pitching you, by the way. It's not like you're jumping or doing whatever. They want you because of your talent. You're not particularly happy where you are. Go be happy, grow and develop. And oh, by the way, it's for more money. Don't worry about perception. Go, learn, develop, have success. Nobody cares if you've had 5 jobs in 5 years. Literally, nobody cares.
Chester, let's go back to these disciplines around leading teams. The first one, understanding generations. You reference a SHRM report in here where it says millennials' top 3 complaints about older workers, meaning you and me, that we're resistant to change, lack recognition of their efforts, and that we micromanage them. And then conversely, the older workers, you and me again, top 3 complaints about millennials is that they have a poor work ethic, they have informal behavior and language, and inappropriate dress. Now, I found these to be quite true and relevant, but I want you to weigh in. How important are these generational differences? There's a whole cottage industry around, understanding and managing 4 to 5, perhaps, different generations in the workplace. Are the differences that big? Has, like most things, the industry made them bigger than they are? What have you found have been the important things to address when it comes to managing generational differences in a team environment?
You asked such great questions. And that was a multi-pronged question. Let me see if I can dissect it for you. It is really interesting that these they seem almost trivial, like inappropriate dress. Well, the whole world is so much more casual, right? And it really is just kind of knowing your environment and setting your expectation. You say, well, they do this that bothers me. Well, they do this that bothers me. So you know what you do? You have the conversation. And you say, look, here are my expectations. Because here's the fact that I know to be true. Every generation's job is to drive the previous generation crazy. I mean, that's your job, right? We drove our parents crazy with the way we dressed and the music we listened to and the language we used, and ever will it be so. And one of the things you touched on that I think is very true is we still have much more in common than we have that differentiates us, right? When we looked at top motivators, we created this really cool online assessment, a motivators assessment. 60,000 people took it. Nice database to draw from. Do you know what motivates both baby boomers and millennials and Gen X? Impact. They want to make a difference, right? It expresses itself a little differently. And those are the nuances of generation, right? We all want to make a difference, right? Bottom line, at the end of the day, guess what? We all want to be happy in our work. We want to feel like we're valued, that what we did mattered, that we made a difference. And when we made a difference, somebody said thank you. Now, on that recognition piece, do millennials on average need more affirmation? Yeah, of course they do. Why? Because as baby boomers, we raised them and we told them they were great. Everything they did was great, right? So why are we surprised that when they come into the workplace that more frequent touches and more affirmations are appropriate? And by the way, it's very appropriate to when somebody does something well to say thank you, to recognize that accomplishment, to reinforce that right behavior. Is the cadence a little different? Well, sure. It always will be. And that gets into another dimension in the book is manage to the one. Know their stories. Know what it is that motivates them, what they're passionate about, and adjust your leadership accordingly. Just to wrap up, I think to explain everything you just said there, old school kind of has the attitude that we treat everybody the same because that's fair. Mm-hmm. New school is we treat everybody fairly and differently. And I love that differentiation. You can treat people differently and still treat people fairly. Don't get stuck in that rut that this is the way we dress, this is the way we talk, this is the way we act. The world is too big a place with cultural differences and language differences, and gender differences, and all those things that come into play, and generational differences, to say, look, I'm going to treat everybody the same because that's fair. That's just foolish.
So Chester, your positivity and energy is contagious. I'm going to harness it now for the second half of this interview, because at the end of your book, beyond these 5 disciplines that you've written with your colleague Adrian, you offer these 101 ways to inspire your team. I read them all, and I picked out kind of my favorite 12 after I narrowed it down from about 25. I'm going to pitch you one and ask if you'll give me about a minute on each. I actually encourage our listeners, our podcast listeners, and our viewers today, take out some notes right now, because this is a super powerful part of this book that you're getting from the famed Chester Elton. This will transform the way our viewers and listeners lead their teams in the next about 10 minutes or so. You ready? You buckled up?
Yes, no pressure.
101 ways to inspire your team. I'm going to now see if you really wrote this book. This will be a good test, okay? Number 2, learn their stories. You talk a bit about the example of Norman Schwarzkopf and the platoons. What's that idea about called learn their stories?
Well, Schwarzkopf was great. He says, you look out and you see the sea of faces. You've got to break it down to eventually it comes down to that one soldier. Know their stories. And that's so key. Do you know their background? Do you know where they came from? Do you know where they want to be 2 to 3 years from now? Do you know what their passions are? I know it takes time. Good leaders do it sometimes. Extraordinary leaders do it all the time. And when you think about the best team leaders you had, I guarantee you they knew your story. Yeah. They knew your background. They knew what really got you excited to get up and come to work in the morning. It's a great tip for great leaders.
In fact, Chester, in each of these 101 tips, you share a short story or concept, and then you actually share an action. Here's what to do. So, for example, on number 2, learn their stories, the action is specifically, over the next week, sit down with each of your direct reports for about 15 minutes and learn their story. Ask about the person's background, their hopes, their goals for the future. Take notes. I couldn't agree more with you. So well said. Let's keep moving. Number 3, find their flow. A lot of people have heard about flow, they've read about flow, but not everybody is intimate with that concept. Describe what the concept of flow means and why is it important in leading a team.
Yeah, I got this concept actually from a book that I love called Boys in the Boat. Did you read that book by any chance?
No.
So it's this spectacular story of the 1939 Olympic rowing team from
I've
the
heard of
University
this.
of Washington.
Yeah.
And they talk about when you get in the zone as a rower, they call it the flow. Everything just kicks in and it becomes effortless. Rowing is incredibly physically taxing. When you get into the flow, though, the boat just glides. And if you talk to rowers and athletes and even musicians, you get into sometimes call it the zone. It's getting into that flow. So it really is trying to figure out how are you getting everybody in the right seat, rowing in the right rhythm, where you get that team that just really comes together, get that flow, make sure everybody is doing their role in a way that meshes with everyone else. If you think about some of the best teams you've been on, everybody knew their role. We weren't in competition with each other. We were all rowing in the same direction. We got into that flow, and work was just a joy. Customer service was high. Customers just started to come in. It's hard to get there. Once you get there, though, you'll never forget it. Get in the flow.
It's so true. I mean, as you were describing it, viscerally I was thinking, mine would have been my team most recently in a previous role here, Todd Music, Jennifer Coons, and James McDermott. And there were others peripherally, but we would get into a room, and I'm sure they would disagree. They probably thought it was chaos, right? But I felt like each of us had that synchronicity and flow where it was not just fun and enjoyable, but it was easy. Even conflict was easy because you all had sort of a dedication to make it work.
And it's incredibly energizing. You're doing all this work, and I'm sure you've had this happen where all of a sudden you look at the clock and you go, oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
Time just flows.
Yeah. Number 6, you call it better allocate your time. I'm passionate about this because, to quote our founder, Hiram Smith, we all have the same amount of time. Same amount as our grandfather did and our great-great-grandfather. How we dedicate it, allocate it is so important. Expand on allocating your time.
Yes, and I love that, allocate your time, because I love it when people say, well, we got to make time for that. Well, you can't. Nobody can make time. Everybody gets the same amount of time. So it's a discipline, and great leaders have that discipline about allocating your time. Making sure you've got time to spend with your people one-on-one. Make sure you've got time to get involved in the projects that are important. Make sure that you take that time and find the time to write a little handwritten note, to improve yourself. I've started to do some executive coaching now, which I really, really enjoy. And I say, look, you've got to take time for yourself. Well, this is very much in your bailiwick, to sharpen the saw. Make sure you find time for yourself to make sure that you've got replenished so that you can give to your team. So that discipline around time is a really important one, particularly in the crush of business today, right? You never have enough time to get everything done. So make sure you've prioritized it. Make sure that you've allocated times in those areas for yourself, for your team, for your customers. And there's no question, it's a discipline.
Chester, I was in a meeting yesterday with Sean Covey, who, of course, is the president of FranklinCovey's education division, the author of the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and about 5 other books. Sean Covey has sold on his own about 10 million copies. Sean is re-releasing his dad's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this next April of 2020. It's the 30th anniversary. That book has sold 30 million copies. And the company is re-releasing it with Sean Covey, not as a co-author, but adding insights and modern-day applications to each of the 7 habits. And yesterday, Sean Covey and I were meeting with our chairman, Bob Whitman, talking about what Sean's adding to the 7 habits. How do you improve on the 7 habits? You really don't. And Sean was saying in the meeting that of all of our own assessments on people's effectiveness with the 7 habits, what is consistently ranked the hardest and least effective is habit 3. Of course, put first things first, right? Is how do you organize your day, your time around your most important priorities? So our research validates yours. Why do you think it is so difficult for leaders of teams, to deliberately allocate time on what generally are the most important roles, contributions they have to make? Why is that so hard?
I think it's just so easy to get distracted. Your phone is constantly buzzing, right? People coming and going. I really do think that smartphones have made given us more access to smart stuff. I don't think that they're actually making us all that smarter because of the constant interruptions. And I think that's the biggest thing that leaders need to do in their discipline is have that, non-digital time, where literally you shut your phone off. Don't put it on silent because it'll vibrate, right? And it'll distract you.
Yeah.
And it's trying to, let me put it this way. I think people right now pride themselves on being able to multitask. I think very, very, very few people do that well. And so that ability to put first things first, as you say so eloquently, and to allocate that time and concentrate to get what's important done first things first is just hard because of all those digital distractions. Yeah. What do you think it is? I'm curious.
I think you're right. I mean, I think my chairman, who's my boss, has asked me deliberately to stop being so distracted in his meetings with my phone, because it's kind of my world, right? I mean, it is my world. It's kind of what I live in, and I need to be much more deliberate around not just putting my phone down, but not bringing my phone into the meeting. I'm leaving this interview and going to a 90-minute meeting with our president, Paul Walker. On your sort of advice right now, I'm going to leave my phone out of the room, as I think it will help my brand with him to be much more focused, because I am also easily distracted. I think the phone is the vast majority of the problem.
Good. Well, we agree. Excellent. Thanks for validating me.
Let's keep going. Number 23. I skipped over 15 great ones. Practice extreme openness.
Yes, again, old school, new school. Old school is, I'm going to keep the information tight. It's on a need-to-know basis. And Scott, you're never going to need to know. This extreme openness is such a good practice for team leaders for a couple of reasons. One is you're asking people for help. Right? You're saying, here's where we are, here's where we're going, here's the situation, give me your ideas. And secondly, it's much more genuine. People are going to find out eventually anyway, right? With all the access that you've got with Glassdoor and, in the business world as people talk. So being extremely open and sharing that information and inviting people into the solution is just so smart, and it's so easy. I know for some leaders, it's hard to let go of that, because somehow you feel like, the old saying, information is power. If I have that information, it makes me powerful. Now the new school is really, the more you give that away, the more power you get back. And so this extreme openness is just, look, I'm going to be really candid. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. I need your help. Let's get there together.
Chester, you and I live in a world of associating with very wise people. You're wiser than I am. And I have many wise quotes to attribute to Dr. Covey. But I also have one that I learned from a former colleague, Rebecca Hession. She's a consultant, a speaker, a TED speaker in Indiana, and a long colleague of FranklinCovey's. And Rebecca Hession said something to me once that has really changed my whole life and trajectory. She said, "We think they don't know. They do." And it's so empowering, is it not? Because everybody knows your messes, your insecurities. They probably could guess your credit score to the closest 15 points and your GPA. So without becoming like a walking confessional, there's just some great vulnerability and authenticity and just being extremely candid and open, as appropriate for your environment, because if she's true, and I think she is, Rebecca says, you think they don't know, they do.
And think about it. Doesn't that take a lot of pressure off of you?
It so does.
It's so liberating.
It's so liberating.
You think they don't know, and they do. You're right, and they can guess your credit score. As long as they can't guess the PIN number on your ATM card, I think we're good.
Increasingly, they probably can. Number 38, spark healthy debates.
Yes, I love this one, and we did a really interesting case study in the book on Bell Helicopter. Harmony is overrated. It really is. Now, having said that, you don't want people so conflicted that it becomes personal. One of the rules I love about healthy debate is you challenge the idea, not the person. And I want to say that again. In healthy debate, you challenge the idea, not the person. As soon as it gets personal, everybody shuts down.
Right.
So these rules of engagement, I think, are so important. Every idea has merit. The best ideas win. Another one that I love is we laugh, but not at each other. Right? We don't laugh at someone else's expense. And once you get that idea where Amy Edmondson from Harvard talks about psychological safety, when you create that psychological safety in debate, where it really is a debate, we're trying to get to the best solution, and I'm safe that you won't laugh at me, then really good things happen. And look, you've got to have conflict. You've got to have that debate. That's where the best ideas come from. There's no question.
I'm going to skip a few because our time is tight. Two more. Number 51, over-communicate why. You talk about how it takes, multiple touch points to communicate. You and I were talking offline before this interview where I said, when I read this, I had a bit of a brain flash, which for me was a brain flash. I'm sure it was, rudimentary to all of our listeners and viewers. And that was, if in marketing, of which I'm the, former chief marketing officer here at FranklinCovey, if we believe it takes, 8 or 9 or 10 times for a prospective client to see our message, why would you not think it would take 8 or 9 times for an internal employee to also understand the message, be it the strategy, the goal, their role, the mission, the why. Talk about why you are so passionate around over communicating the why.
Well, and it comes back to all the things we talked about. Different generations want to be communicated in different ways, right? And you're exactly right. We do all this work to market to our customers. We should be doing more work to communicate to our employees. And so I love this idea of saying, look, everybody should be able to tell you what they do and how they do it. The why, that's the emotional connection to work. That's where productivity and engagement really sparks. So how are you doing that? Newsletters, town meetings, one-on-ones, emails, texts, video chats. I mean, think of every possible way you can communicate to your employees and make sure that why we do what we do, and not just the statement, how it's impacting our colleagues, how it's impacting our company, how it's impacting our communities, our customers, the world, right? That noble cause that we all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, right? And the more you communicate that and the more you embed that into your employees, the more engaging they're going to be. And again, don't just say, hey, we put up the posters. What more do you want from us, right? Sure, put up the posters. Make sure you're doing everything else as well and that you're communicating in ways that are meaningful to your employees. You get their minds, that's great. You get their hearts, now you're off to the races.
Chester, the book is exceptional. I recommend all of our listeners and viewers to pick up a copy. The Best Team Wins, if nothing less, just for the last half. These 101 tips are so practical. Challenge each other, draft a rallying cry, rotate leadership, reach out to virtual, speak last. One that I love is 63. It's the last one I'll share, is give great feedback. It's something I'm super passionate about. What's been your experience as to why leaders who lead high-performing teams, what is it they do when it comes to giving great feedback?
Well, here's what they do that I think is extraordinary, is they make sure that in any given day, they're having positive interactions with their people, right? So often as leaders, we like to point out what's going wrong because with leaders, we fix things. And so if we're the guys that fix things, what are we looking for? We're looking for things that are going wrong. The exceptional leaders also take note of all the things that are going right? And they make sure that they're giving feedback on that so that when you have to have the tougher conversations, and this is very much Stephen Covey, right? You've got this bank of goodwill. So that when you and I have to have that tough conversation, I know you're not beating me up just because you can. You're the boss, I'm not. It's you're really coaching me up to be better. You've realized and you've complimented me on, you've thanked me for all this great work I've done over all this big period of time. And now you're saying, hey, we need to talk about this. We need to do that. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again, or we need to change the way we're doing this, and so on. It's being coachable. And if I've got that bank of goodwill, I can be very candid in how I coach you. I can be very candid in my feedback because we've got a meaningful relationship. It doesn't damage the way we work together. It doesn't change our relationship. If anything, it enhances it. Good leaders give great feedback, not just on what's going wrong, especially on what's going right. Does that ring true to you?
It does, and I love my dad, but had you been like my dad or my older brother, I'd be so much more successful right now, and I love my father. But your energy is contagious. I know why you are booked around the world nonstop. I know why you have like nearly 250,000 LinkedIn followers. Tell us what's next for you. Are there some books on the horizon? People who are finding your work compelling, how do they get in touch with you? Talk a bit about what's next for Chester and Adrian.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. By the way, I enjoy your energy too. It is contagious, and this has been the most fun interview I've done all day. I just want you to know.
Thanks a lot.
Anyway, what's next on the horizon? We just finished our 11th book with HarperCollins Business.
Yep.
It's called Leading with Gratitude, the 8 best practices of extraordinary leaders that leads to extraordinary results. And I'll tell you, the timing of this book, Scott, we're really focused on is, I really believe the world needs more gratitude. You look at the online bullying, you look at all the negative news feed you get, you look at the political discourse that's just so vitriolic and so nasty that you've got to step back and realize that, you know what, there's never been a more amazing time to be alive. We've never been more privileged. We've never been more fortunate to be where we are. And these extraordinary leaders that we got to interview shared with us their best practices. Well, first off, we debunked the myths, and then we share the best practices around, assuming positive intent, that people come to work to do a good job. Let's be grateful for that. And gratitude for us is an extension of all the work we did on recognition. I think recognition sometimes can appear a little transactional. It's the certificate, it's the thing. I think gratitude, and I think that's important, by the way, I think gratitude takes it to that next level. I really am grateful for our friendship. I'm grateful for your sacrifices. I'm grateful for the difference that you make. To build those really good, positive relationships that flow. Of all the data we've looked at, and we have a database of almost 1 million engagement surveys now, is that when you are happy and engaged at work, you are 150% more likely to be happy and engaged in your personal life. And so the third part of our book is take it home, apply it to your personal lives. Work is life and life is work. And the more we can introduce this spirit of gratitude, this idea that we lead from positivity, we lead with gratitude, the better off our teams are going to be, the more productive they're going to be, the more engaged they're going to be, the better it's going to mean for our businesses and our customers. And more than that, how it flows into our families and our communities. So we're very passionate about our new work. It comes out in March, which I'm delighted comes out before your reissue of 7 Habits. And I think timing hopefully will be very good, and it will make a difference for a lot of people.
Hey, Chester.
Yes?
I'm grateful for your friendship.
As I am for yours, Scott. I'm delighted that over 15 years we have not lost track of each other.
It's true.
Thank you so much for interviewing me and inviting me to your podcast. It really is a joy and a pleasure to be around such positive and such good people. So I am grateful for you too.
Hey, the feeling is mutual. You've been a great friend and collaborator and champion of the FranklinCovey family for many years and decades to come, I hope, and we'll certainly send out an invitation to your team to invite you back on when the new book comes out in the spring.
Excellent. Well, and lastly, if you want any of this great information, just go to our website, thecultureworks.com. We got all kinds of tips and tricks. Follow us on LinkedIn. We give away a lot of stuff. Our goal is to make a difference and make people just happier at work, happier in their life. So thanks so much, Scott.
I highly recommend you connecting or following Chester on LinkedIn. You do a great, is it almost weekly book review? Is it weekly?
Every Friday we do a great little book review, which means I'm reading maniacally all week. It's been a great exercise for me. And of course we featured your book, The Management Mess, which was brilliant. And I can't tell you how just really excited I am for your success. Well-deserved, well-earned.
Chester, you're a great friend to have. I have as a must never miss watching your book review on LinkedIn on Friday. Can't recommend it enough. Chester Elton on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you back in about 6 months to have you back on for your next book.
I look forward to it. Take care, Scott.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us. And our time is up. We'll see you next week with a new guest on FranklinCovey's On Leadership series. If you're not subscribing, visit FranklinCovey.com. Click on the On Leadership tab. It's a free weekly newsletter that comes out every Tuesday morning around 8 o'clock Eastern Time with an interview just like today's, as well as a downloadable FranklinCovey tool and a blog article authored by me about the topic of the week. And you also can consume this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, FranklinCovey, you name it. We'll see you here next week with a new guest on leadership.